Today I'm going to go over the 3-hole yarn foot, and by extension I'm also basically going over the 7-hole cording foot as well, because it's basically the same foot except that it has 7 holes instead of 3. So I'm going to show you different types of cording materials that you can use this foot with and some project ideas, and hopefully get you excited about using the 3-hole yarn foot. So the first thing you need to do is to get the cording or yarn or whatever you're using into the foot. And the instructions say that you want to put the cording in from front to back. And when I did that, invariably I'd get it all set up and I'd put it on the ankle, and one of the cords or threads would fall out, and then I'd have to take it off the ankle and start over again. So what I do now is I tie a knot in the end, and I'm using Razzle Dazzle. It's a decorative thread, and so I tie a knot in the end, and instead of going from front to back, I turn it over and go back to front, and you'll see why in a moment. So I'm going to stick my thread in, and the foot does come with a threader. So I started out by putting the threads through the back, and so my knot is holding them in place. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put my ankle on, and your threads are not going to fall out because you have that knot there. But you would want to pull the knot back a little bit so that you don't start sewing over the knot. And I'm going to put my fabric in place and put my foot down to hold it. And then I'm going to show you on the Designer Epic 2 that I'm sewing on where you would find these stitches. So I'm going to show you now how to find the right stitch for the 3-hole yarn foot. On the Designer Epic 2, we have a category that has stitches especially designed for the 3-hole yarn foot. And many of our Viking sewing machines will also. And if not, there will be other stitches that will look pretty good as well. You need a stitch that is 6 to 7 millimeters wide at a minimum, and has mostly forward motion, not a lot of going backwards and forwards. So on the Epic, Designer Epic 2, I would be in sewing, and I'd touch Start New. And I would go to the P category, which is where a lot of specialty stitches reside. These stitches are for doing candle wicking with candle wicking foot, and these stitches down here where there is looks like there's yarn behind the stitches are for the 3-hole yarn foot. So there's 5 stitches there, but there are many stitches, particularly in the vintage category, that will work very well. So like this stitch or this stitch, as long as it's 6 to 7 millimeters wide. Now the Designer Epic 2 goes up to 9 millimeters. So if you are going to use one of the 3-hole yarn stitches that is a 9 millimeter stitch, you will need the new 3-hole yarn foot made for the Designer Epic 2, which has an opening of 9 millimeters across here, and it has the cutout in the back for the integrated dual feet, our integrated walking foot. You can use the other 3-hole yarn foot, our original one. It will not work with the IDF, and you should only go up to a size 7 millimeter stitch with that original 3-hole yarn foot. And the original 3-hole yarn foot will work with many of our Vikings. If you wonder about your machine, you can look it up online or in the accessories user guide. So I'm going to load a stitch here, like that one. And then I'm going to switch cameras so that you can see me. I have my stitch chosen, and I'm going to make sure that my knot is back behind the foot. I'm going to put my needle down, and I could use the foot control, or I could use the start stop, which is what I'm going to use. And I'm going to cut and show you what this looks like. So it makes a really beautiful stitch, and you could tighten that up if you wanted. But you could see how this could be a really nice decorative element on a project. Here is a napkin that I used that foot to help embellish this rather plain napkin. Here's the edge. This stitch here was done with a 3-hole yarn foot, and these I used the multi-line decorative foot, and then down here I used the bead foot, which I'll be making a video on that relatively soon. And I also wanted to show you how I would use it on a quilt. I often will use this to decorate my borders. Here's a close-up, and I will show you some long shots so you can see what the whole project looks like. But you can see how it makes a nice decorative element. It gives the border some texture. You would want to do this, of course, before you put your binding on, so the binding would cover up the tails. Cord. And I just want to go over some of the materials that you can use with this foot. You can use this metallic thread, the razzle dazzle. You can use thin ribbon, like a 1/8 inch ribbon. You can use this cotton cording, very inexpensive, or this cotton cording. And you can even use satin cording, some people call it rat's tail. And I'll show you what those things look like once I find my sample. Well, here it is. Okay, so here is a sample of just using red ribbon, three strands of red ribbon, then 3 different colors of ribbon, and then I used a different, more intense stitch. The stitches are closer together. And here is the satin cording, and with a more intense stitch. And this material, the satin cording, you can actually stitch that not on fabric but on 2 layers of water soluble, and then this can be used to make a lanyard for, say, a scissor holder or something of that sort. So that's fun to play with. And then, of course, yarn, and the 3-hole yarn foot, got to show yarn, variegated yarn. Then here's your cotton cording, 2 different stitches. Starting out up here, this is a vintage stitch, and this is a different vintage stitch, and still a different vintage stitch down here at the bottom. And then over here, I took a ribbon and stitched it down using the 3-hole yarn foot. Now, I would recommend that before you do that you use some sort of fusible to fuse your ribbon down, or it may drift on you. It will just behave better with some fusible underneath it. So there's lots of fun things that you can do with this foot. I really like it and use it quite frequently.